Hello and welcome back to History Recreates Itself. No, History Repeats Itself. My apologies. My name's Negative Root, and I'll be your host today for the launch of Sputnik 1. The date is the 4th of October 1952, and the Russians, the Soviets, are about to put the first artificial satellite into space, and we have the launch vehicle that's going to do it. This is the R7. It is the first kind of ICBM that was really capable, and it formed the foundation for the most successful rocket family in the history of the world. Basically, nothing else has really come close to the R7, the Soyuz, the Vostok, the Voskhod, and yeah, I think the Soyuz is still actually in use today, and it's still based on this idea. Now you'll notice down the bottom here, if I can get close, it's got this engine configuration. You notice that it's got smaller engines on the outside and bigger engines on the inside. This design was, when you look at it, you think, that doesn't really look right. It's a bit odd shaped, especially how it's thinner down here and larger on top. But what the Russians did was they were able to design this rocket, and they used these outer engines as basically the control engines. So they control left and right, up and down, not up and down, left and right. Your trim in each direction, and the big ones in the middle provide the boost. It was a very interesting design. The Americans had their own way of doing rockets, so I've made a few minor modifications to this. This is from a mod pack. I'll post in the link in the description, and it's really cool. As you can see, very good looking rocket. I'll just back up a bit so you can see it. Now, what I need to do is get it down here. The only thing that's missing is the launch clamps, which were a big truss that actually supported the weight of the rocket until it launched off. So it would kind of clamp it. The weight of gravity would hold the clamps together, and then as it took off, the clamps would release as the rocket rose. So I'm going to have probably 2 cracks at getting this into the right orbit. We need to get it up to an orbit of 215 by 939 to recreate the Sputnik orbit. So we'll see how we go. Now, the first way of doing it, where is our orbit info? Here we go. That's probably not going to be any use to us. Rightio, off we go. So I'm going to have 2 cracks at it. The first will be the way that the rocket did it, and the second will be me cheating. So now, as you see, as I move the rocket over, now we've got these engines on the side providing the control. Very revolutionary idea. Now, I'm just going to boost as far as we can. Now these, I've added a few separatrons, and this is to get a certain effect. The godfather of the Soviet space program was a fellow by the name of Korolev, and he was the driving force behind the thing. His death coincided with kind of the time at which America took the lead in the space race. Korolev was the driving force behind pretty much everything that the Russians were doing in the space program. Without him, they were really lost at sea. They struggled from there on in. Sputnik was kind of his doing. He pushed to get this first object into space, and he really led the Russians. Not the Russians, the Americans. The Americans had no idea what was happening. Now the Korolev cross, I'm hoping this will work, looks something like that. Without the explosions. Hopefully it didn't take out my rocket. But yeah, so we're going to continue to climb. We need to start adding a little bit of horizontal. Alright, maybe a lot of horizontal. We'll see how we go. Because this engine, right, it would never have shut off most of the time what most players will do is they'll shut off their engine once they've got the bright periapsis, the apoapsis rather, and then coast to the burn. And I don't think I'm going to be able to do this because that's not slowing up. God damn it. Okay. So, obviously I'm taking a fair bit of creative license here because that engine never would have stopped. It would have just made one burn up to the correct altitude. Now what I need is an apoapsis height of 939. Now I'm also neglecting the inclination here as well. I don't want to overcomplicate matters. Because oh yes, of course, I forgot about that. Very little control on the rocket. Is the original Sputnik would have not been able to shut off its engines, coast to an apoapsis and then circularize the burn. It just wouldn't have happened. They hadn't kind of figured out the programming required, they didn't have the control needed, and the rocket engines weren't that sophisticated. They weren't able to stop and restart and stop and restart and do all the monkey business that the modern rockets do. Now, the way they were controlled in space too wasn't with SAS, it was with RCS. So these modern rockets wouldn't have had any kind of control like I am doing, any kind of rotational control. They would have been, you know, pretty much someone lights the fuse and then they'll hear about it 90 minutes later. Now, with the inclination, the way it works, say this is Europe, right? Because Baikonur in Kazakhstan, where the Sputnik 1 was launched, it was launched from somewhere up here. So when it enters orbit, it ends up in a circularized, an inclined orbit. So when you're looking through like all the space data, you notice that all the Russian orbits are at about 65 degrees, and then all the American ones are at about 30 something. So it took me a moment to work out what was happening there. But yeah, when you launch it, say you know, Baikonur is here and Florida is down here, you know, you can see that difference is 20 degrees. And indeed, launching a rocket from a more northern latitude would be a little bit harder than a southern latitude. The most efficient place to launch a rocket is from, of course, the equator, where you get the most bang for your buck when it comes to delta V. You get that the rotation of the planet helping you into orbit. Now, we'll just slow down here and we'll just set off our burn, which shouldn't take long. Okay. Just fine tune this down, get it to about where we need it to be. Now in the first example of space travel, what would happen is, yep, top stage is in the thing, we would deploy the top cap. Now here is the satellite. So we will just control from here, and then we'll launch. Now the booster stage actually stays in orbit. There we go. So there we go. Sputnik 1 is now in orbit. The beep, beep, beep can be heard around the Earth for, I think it was 60 something days until the battery ran out in it. But that entire time, this little satellite was just orbiting the Earth, and we've got it pretty close to what it was in real life. So you can see that it's not the most perfect orbit ever, but it is what it is. So we'll just jump back. We'll just skip to this stage because this is going to stay here. Bye. Uh-oh. I don't think I can rename this. Shit. That's a bugger. This is going to stay here for a while. So we're going to rename it Sputnik 1. Yes, wonderful. What's this called? Let's have a look. It's a Sputnik 1 probe, maybe. Anyway, so that is the Sputnik mission. In a couple of months' time, the orbit of Sputnik does decay. Sputnik, here it is. Does decay, but by that stage, the Russians have certainly fired the first shots in the space race and thrown down the gauntlet to America to beat them. It's a really good-looking model. Until next time, I've been Negative Root, and I'll see you in the next episode of History Repeats Itself.